world might crumble. The inability to consider all the ramifications of these signs helps explain why Europe's political culture decided to turn the old world into flaming wreckage. The Serbian people of the Balkans had developed enormous national pride and grounded it in a partially fictionalized history. They had no interest in becoming another principality of the Habsburg Empire. The burgeoning economies in Western Europe depended more and more on the markets and materials of their colonial possessions, without which they feared economic ruin at home. Russia lost a war in 1905 to Japan, and suddenly a new power appeared on the world stage, one that constituted an utter riddle to most in the West, despite its long and fascinating history. The United States had also won a war against Spain, a seemingly decrepit European power. Wars like the short but bloody Crimean conflict and the protracted American Civil War suggested that changes in technology could now kill in the tens of thousands while leaving whole generations scarred and wounded. But a tenuous peace existed while nations and empires played with whole populations as if they were chess pieces. The gamesmanship of the old powers of Europe rigged up a complicated system of alliances, tethered to one another in such a way that one falling into the abyss would drag all the others with it. In the summer of 1914, the coming of the conflict that at first saw Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Central Powers, fighting against France, Britain, Russia, and Serbia, the Allies, caused an eerie joy to come to the romantically inclined. In this book, we will watch writers and artists and actors and early film directors joining artillery companies, machine gun units, and the infantry. Many, though certainly not all, Europeans spoke of the conflict as an adventure, and probably a short-lived one in which the grinding routine of daily life would give way to the elan of conflict. Everyone expected to return home a hero. Like a storm breaking the monotony of a hot, dry day, the dark clouds of war thundered across the landscape while a vital rain poured down. In only a few short weeks, however, horror replaced the so-called war fever of the summer. On the Western Front, Germany swept through Belgium. German troops came within 18 miles of Paris, causing at least 1 million of the city's 3 million inhabitants to flee. British and French troops fought back the Germans at the Battle of the Marne, but both sides suffered catastrophic losses. 15,000 British soldiers died in just 2 weeks of fighting. In the east, Tsarist Russia had some early successes against Austria-Hungary and Germany invading East Prussia. At the Battle of Tannenberg in August, a relatively small German army under Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff handed the Russian Empire a defeat from which it never fully recovered. The fighting enveloped Eastern Europe, in Bulgaria, which fought alongside the Central Powers, in Serbia and Romania, both joined to the Allies. By late 1914, the Germans had been pushed back to defensive positions in France. Both sides began building elaborate trenches, earthworks serving as fortifications, unlikely homes, and burial pits. The no-man's land that stretched between the armies became a blasted landscape, wrapped in barbed wire, scoured by shelling, and covered with dead bodies that rotted unburied. Men on both sides lived in fetid conditions for months on end without relief. Rats and all manner of other vermin swarmed in the muddy dark. The shelling that signaled an offensive could go on for days, shattering nerves. The night would explode with rifle fire and the rattle of the Maxim gun, the machine gun that shredded the soldiers ordered to charge into the enemy's trenches. Dugouts built for safety resembled the narrator's tomb in Edgar Allan Poe's short story The Premature Burial, when soldiers choked to death on the earth from their own collapsed defenses. The trench system horrified observers who saw it for the first time. Valentine Fleming, a British member of Parliament and friend of Winston Churchill, traveled to France at the end of 1914 and wrote of the absolutely indescribable ravages of modern artillery fire, not only among men, animals, and the buildings within its zone, but the very face of nature itself. He described a landscape littered with the bodies of men and scarified with their rude graves, while the air seemed to explode night and day with the hideous, incessant crash and whistle and roar of every type of projectile.